Chapter 1846, The Gap. Shia Holan hid herself several dozen meters below the ground, where the scorching air of the outside world could not reach her. After Zhang Yi set the flames alight, he took an energy bar out of dimensional space and waited expressionlessly for the flames to spread. Shia Holan, what are you going to do? It's better to run out quickly, so that I can end this faster. Oh, no. You are a stubborn woman, quite a bit like someone who would rather die than submit. But if I want to end this fight, I must kill you. The chances of defeating a strong opponent with weak skills are very slim, and you can only take advantage of the opponent's arrogance and laxity. Unfortunately, I won't give you any chances. Zhang Yi sat and waited for Shia Holan to appear. Shia Holan's combat experience was not as good as his, and the key was that her weapons and equipment were also far inferior to his. If she wanted to win, she could only use strange tactics. So Zhang Yi didn't need to do anything, just wait patiently. The huge primeval jungle was burning fiercely, and black smoke rose up into the sky. The firelight brought a feeling of warmth. Zhang Yi thought about it for a while and confirmed the temperature outside. At this time, he was thousands of meters above ground, and due to the influence of the flames below, he could feel that the temperature was also over 20 degrees. So Zhang Yi temporarily turned off the thermostat in his combat suit. For the first time in a long time, he felt the temperature of nature. The scorching smoke drifted away with the wind, and he could smell the smell of burning wood, as well as the sound of wood cracking in his ears. Everything was so familiar that it made him feel a little nostalgic. A big fire, he didn't know how long it would burn. Zhang Yi was not sure if the world in front of him was real or fake. But everything he felt, saw, smelled, and felt the temperature of was no different from the real world. He couldn't help but once again exclaim at the strength of the mighty god-level civilization. He waited for a whole day. When Shia Holan crawled out of the dry mud, there was a deep look of despair in her eyes. Do you have to be so cautious when fighting me? Shia Holan's tone was even a little aggrieved. Even if you just give me a little chance, do you have to be so cautious? Zhang Yi's voice drifted through the sky. Why bother with a fight that you can easily win? He looked down at his armor and the divine refinement in his hands, and sighed slightly. In your current state, even if I entrust it to the intelligence system to fight on its own, you still might not be able to win. In the end, Zhang Yi's gun spit out a bullet, killing Shia Holan. Shia Holan disappeared from this world as a stream of light, and the next moment she was resurrected in the outside world. Here, Uncle Yu and the others were waiting for the aftermath. The light doors had been closed, preventing anyone else from entering. Shia Holan let out a long sigh and looked at her right hand. The feeling of having that kind of powerful and peerless strength in her hand had also disappeared at this moment. She couldn't help but let out a wry smile. Power that is not your own will never be yours. Even if you temporarily obtain it, you will never be able to master it. From the very beginning, I never had a chance to win. In another battlefield, Yang Xinxin opened her eyes to find herself in a dark place. There were tall buildings on both sides, built with an unknown material that looked to be gleaming with metal, unlike reinforced concrete. In the sky, there was a bright moon. Yang Xinxin looked up at the moon in the sky and her eyes became serious. In a cold voice, she said to the intelligence system in her battle suit, "Analyze the parameters of the moon in the sky." The intelligence system quickly zoomed in on the lens and magnified the moon in the sky for analysis. Soon, Yang Xinxin received the results of the analysis. This moon is exactly the one we are familiar with, so we are currently in the right environment on the planet. Yang Xinxin scanned the surroundings, but said indifferently, "It's not the planet from our time. This is probably the projection space of a mighty god-level civilization, simulating an image from their time." The huge buildings made humans look incredibly small in front of them. "Prepare for battle," Yang Xinxin said, and pressed her right hand against her chest. A dark suit of armor immediately completely encased her entire body. This was the exoskeleton armor that Lu Karen had created for her. Although Yang Xinxin rarely appeared on the front lines, Zhang Yi prepared her with all the weapons she could think of, in case she ever needed them. Unexpectedly, this time, she really had to face the enemy alone, and her equipment came in handy. Although this was Yang Xinxin's first time fighting independently, she was not at all panicked, but calmly analyzed the situation in front of her. Her ability was best at controlling matter, but it was not easy to hit the target with the arrow of the fallen angel puppet. Fortunately, she has an exoskeleton armor, which allows her to fight without looking too awkward. Right now, I need to first confirm who my opponent is, as well as his location and abilities. Then I'll figure out how to deal with it. Their battlefield is a super city from ancient times, and it is not easy to find the enemy in such an environment. But soon, Yang Xinxin heard a deafening noise in her ear. She looked up, and in her dark eyes, she caught a thrilling scene. Huge skyscrapers had been plucked from the ground. They were being held aloft like toys by an invisible giant. Rumble! Rumble! One after the other, the skyscrapers in front of her were flying through the air, and the next moment, they smashed down in the direction Yang Xinxin was standing. There were only two possibilities for what had happened. The first was a psionic ability user. But even a telepathic ability user would have a hard time manipulating so many skyscrapers at the same time. The second possibility is that the opponent can manipulate the materials of these skyscrapers. Yang Xinxin immediately made a judgment based on the scene in front of her. Columbia's Superman, Brian or Magneto. Only their abilities can manipulate dozens of skyscrapers like toys so easily. The skyscrapers in this world are far taller than those of humans, and buildings hundreds of meters high can be seen everywhere. The opponent used this simple and crude method in order to quickly find Yang Xinxin's location. Looking at the densely packed buildings around her, Yang Xinxin's brows furrowed slightly. No matter who the opponent was, his abilities would give him a significant advantage on this battlefield. Yang Xinxin lowered her head and glanced at the armor on her body. Without hesitation, she activated the exoskeleton armor and quickly fled in the distance. Soon after she left, a tall building directly collapsed on the spot where she had just been, with a deafening explosion. Boom! The intense impact exploded into a terrifying blaze, lighting up the night sky. Yang Xinxin discovered that the opponent's attack method was indiscriminate in all directions. She chose to clear the field and expose the opponent. Yang Xinxin's enemy, as she had expected, was Columbia's Magneto, Elsa Goodman. She and Yang Xinxin appeared on the battlefield at the same time. Not knowing who her enemy was, she didn't hesitate for a second and chose to clear the battlefield. Because in a city made of a large amount of special metals at that, almost everything could become her weapon. So, she had to clear away all visual obstructions in the shortest amount of time. An indiscriminate attack on the entire city will definitely make the opponent appear. Moreover, a city reduced to ruins is more conducive to the display of her abilities. You are really unlucky. Here, I have the advantage of home field. Then you are finished. A crazed smile appeared at the corner of Elsa's mouth. She raised her hands high into the air, and in all directions, buildings made of metal rose up one after the other. The ruins above the ground, and the steel in the building fragments also floated into the air. The huge buildings were thrown into the distance, and the broken metal formed a huge circle around her to prevent sudden attacks from her enemies. Facing this method of attack, Yang Xinxin chose to retreat again and again. After a few minutes, she arrived at the edge of the city. Here, she felt an invisible barrier blocking her path. Sure enough, this battlefield has boundaries. Yang Xinxin came to this conclusion. She gazed intently and began to simulate in her mind. Judging by the situation, the entire battlefield would not span more than 1,000 kilometers in length. With the power of a mutant of Epsilon level, it would take a considerable amount of time to completely clear the battlefield. There was no way to escape. The battle could only end with the death of at least one person from either side. Yang Xinxin understood that if he wanted to win, there was only one way: the arrow from the fallen angel puppet had to hit his opponent. Rumble! In the sky, a giant building approaching 1,000 meters high was thrown high into the air, and then thrown towards the vicinity of where Yang Xinxin was located. "I found you." Elsa's mouth curled up into a crazed smile. With all the destruction, Yang Xinxin's trail had begun to be exposed. In a city burning with flames, a humanoid creature running quickly can hardly conceal its tracks. Elsa is standing on a huge metal plate, surrounded by a huge ring of metal fragments that are whirling like a storm, and she is rushing towards Yang Xinxin at great speed. She opens her right hand towards Yang Xinxin, and the metal fragments come shooting at her like a rainstorm. Yang Xinxin's eyes narrowed as she faced the mountain-like skyscraper and looked at Elsa, who was attacking her. She decisively used her ability. A huge fallen angel puppet appeared behind Yang Xinxin. The tattered angel puppet, manipulated by puppet strings, opened its huge long bow with seemingly clumsy but actually extremely fast hands. A black arrow leapt onto it. Elsa's eyes became serious as she saw this, and a large amount of metal fragments wrapped around her body. "Although I'm not sure of your specific abilities, as long as it can't hit me, it can have an effect, right? You only have one arrow, but my weapons are endless. This city made of metal is completely my home court. I'd like to see how you can win against me." Yang Xinxin did indeed only have one arrow, while the metal fragments that attacked her were endless. Not to mention the huge skyscrapers that were smashing down on her like mountains in the sky. So she raised the angle of her arrow and shot it into the sky. This arrow hit the huge skyscraper precisely. Trojan horse implantation can control all existences in the material world, not just living things, but even non-living things. This ability could not prevent the huge building from falling, but it could cause its structure to collapse mid-air. Boom! Boom! The building disintegrated in mid-air, and a large amount of building debris crashed downwards, just blocking Elsa's path of attack. Her first attack was easily deflected by Yang Xinxin. Elsa narrowed her eyes. "You can control objects, but it seems that only objects that have been shot at will be controlled. I have an idea." She waved her hands in midair, and a large amount of metal garbage turned into a storm and wrapped around her body, leaving no gaps. "In this state, I don't think you can use your abilities." And she stared at Yang Xinxin, who was running away into the distance. Restricted by the city's boundaries, she couldn't get far and could only run around the perimeter. Elsa stared at the exoskeleton armor on her body, and a cruel smile curled the corner of her mouth. "You're finished." She stepped on the metal plate and quickly closed the distance between her and Yang Xinxin. Yang Xinxin looked back at Elsa, who was closing in, and the fallen angel puppet's arrow transformed. The black arrow turned into a red arrow. Cupid's arrow. Whoosh! Cupid's arrow pierced the air and shot at Elsa. The huge metal storm surrounding Elsa couldn't even stop it for a moment. The red arrow pierced the metal storm and shot at Elsa's body. Elsa was shocked for a moment when she saw this. A red arrow, can it ignore material obstacles? Her body twisted in the air at high speed, and the red arrow flew past her side. Luckily, it wasn't fast. I was able to dodge it completely. Elsa let out a sigh of relief in her heart. At this time, the distance between her and Yang Xinxin was already enough for her to activate her own ability. Elsa raised her palm towards the distant Yang Xinxin. Magnetic control. Yang Xinxin, who was running away, suddenly stopped in midair. The exoskeleton armor she was wearing was completely under Elsa's control, and her entire body was lifted into the air, forming a standard pentagon shape. "I'll just tear you to pieces." Elsa's smile at the corner of her mouth was incredibly cruel. She gently rotated her palm, and the sound of metal breaking could be heard in her ears, as if she were going to tear Yang Xinxin apart along with the exoskeleton armor. However, at this moment, the sound of breaking air suddenly came from all directions, as if thousands of arrows were attacking her body.